Think about the absolute worst mistake you could make at work or school. Spilling a drink on a keyboard, maybe deleting an important file. Now imagine your mistake accidentally hands the keys to an entire digital universe to a bunch of random kids on the internet. That is exactly what happened to Roblox on April 1st, 2012. Before game creators push a big update to everyone, they test it on a fake, safe version of the game. Back then, they used a testing zone called Site Test 3. It was supposed to be completely walled off from the real game, but the developers made a mind-numbing security error. See, when you log into a website, it gives your browser a tiny file called a cookie. Think of it like getting a stamp on your hand at a theme park. It tells the site who you are so you don't have to keep showing your ticket every time you go on a ride. The mistake was that the developers used the exact same hand stamp system for the fake testing site and the real live game. A group of players figured out this secret. They logged into the fake test site and created a totally blank dummy account, but they named it after a real-life administrator. The site handed them an admin hand stamp. They just copied that code, pasted it right into their browser on the normal homepage, and suddenly they were in. They completely bypassed every single security wall without writing any complicated hacker code. They just walked right through the front door. Because it was April Fool's Day, kids logging in that morning just thought the developers were playing a funny prank. They saw these bright, messy banners plastered all over the top of the website. The banners were telling players to do a barrel roll, reminding them to vote for Ron Paul, or randomly saying, "I'm the annoying orange banner" in huge letters. It just looked like an edgy middle schooler got a hold of the controls. But the joke got out of hand incredibly fast. The hackers completely broke the game's store. They forced secret, unreleased items into the shop and dropped the prices of super rare hats down to almost nothing. They even released a super creepy classic face called C for exactly 100 Robux. Almost nobody could buy it without getting a server error, but a famous administrator named Stickmaster Luke logged straight in and equipped the face while the whole platform was falling apart around him. In a matter of minutes, the entire game's artificial scarcity was completely destroyed. One random player named Qman1245 was suddenly running around wearing the legendary Dominus Imperius hat and carrying an actual administrator ban hammer. Another player grabbed an item called Dominus Frigidus number 16. That specific item was worth about 8 million Robux at the time. Then the actual staff accounts started getting compromised. Real human moderators like Reese McBlocks and Crow had their old forum posts hijacked and edited to display profanity to a platform filled entirely with children. That is not even the part that breaks the story open. Right in the middle of all this chaos, dead players started coming back to life. Think about what that actually means for a second. The hijackers dug deep into the platform's history to resurrect classic accounts. They brought back a legendary user named Manish, who was permanently banned years earlier. They hijacked another old player named Feedy, and then they actually promoted them to become forum moderators. The platform was suddenly being policed by rogue accounts. They even used Manish's compromised account to target a famous trader named Merely, buying his personal favorite item, purely to tank the economy and rub the whole thing in his face. You're sitting there completely helpless. You're watching rogue teenagers wear your staff accounts like a skin suit while your digital economy burns to the ground. CEO David Bazuki had to step in. He pulled the plug and shut the entire website down that evening, just to stop the bleeding. The next day, he posted a blog explaining they had to undo all the money transactions, claiming it only affected a tiny fraction of accounts. They even scrubbed that creepy C face off the store and changed it into the Dr. Smythe face. but the permanent damage was already done. Millions of kids watched their favorite game shatter in real time. They realized the creators weren't untouchable gods. They were just regular people who accidentally left the back door wide open. And once players realized the game could be broken this easily, they started looking for ghosts in every single corner of the machine. If you're enjoying the video so far, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps a lot. When you try to picture the most terrifying threat in the history of online gaming, your brain probably jumps straight to some shadowy hacker with a super edgy screen name full of numbers. You definitely don't picture a happy little block character named after an unidentified dead body. But that is exactly what happened here. If you actually dig into the raw database files for Roblox, you will find something super interesting. John Doe is user ID number 2, and Jane Doe is number 3. The guys who created the whole platform, David Baszucki and Eric Castle, made both of these accounts way back on June 25th, 2005. You have to remember what the internet was like back then. The game was an absolute ghost town. There were 0 active players wandering around. So the creators just built these 2 fake accounts to act as friendly companions. If a real kid ever logged in, the developers would just drop whatever code they were working on and use John or Jane to join the server. They just wanted to make sure the new kid didn't feel completely alone in an empty world. But by early 2006, the game got popular. They didn't need the fake accounts anymore, so the accounts went completely dark on February 27th, 2006. And for almost an entire decade, they just sat there rotting at the very bottom of the database. But around 2015, players noticed something totally impossible. These dead, abandoned accounts were suddenly adding new friends. They were randomly earning badges from brand new games that didn't even exist when the accounts originally went offline. Everyone immediately panicked. People thought some hacker broke into the main system and hijacked the oldest accounts in the game. But the actual truth is much simpler. The ghosts never woke up at all. A completely random player called The Community figured out how to abuse an obscure player class property bug. He realized he could change a few numbers in the code to force any account on the entire website to accept a friend request. The actual owner never even had to click yes. He basically gave other trolls the exact blueprint to force the old test accounts to be their friends. A bunch of players then figured out a totally different glitch that let them force award game badges to offline users. A developer named Maximum ADHD eventually stepped in and planted 4 specific game badges directly onto John and Jane's profiles. When you lined up their badges in order, they spelled out, "John Doe is not a hacker, you goofballs." He turned their accounts into a public announcement just to kill the rumor. But the YouTube clickbait machine caught fire anyway. By early 2017, this huge rumor started spreading that John and Jane Doe were going to log in and destroy the entire website on March 18th. YouTubers were dropping these super dramatic videos, acting like the actual end of the world was scheduled for a Saturday. Creepy games started popping up everywhere. There was one called Prove It that showed a destroyed headquarters with a floating John Doe counting down to the exact date. Thousands of little kids absolutely panicked. They were terrified their accounts were going to get wiped out. A lot of kids actually refused to even log in that day. But the scariest part of this whole story has nothing to do with hacking at all. The player named The Community wasn't trying to hack the servers or destroy the game. He was literally just a scammer tricking little kids for clout. He just used the friend glitch to attach himself to the biggest internet rumor on the platform. It is honestly wild how easy it was to trick an entire generation of players. You have thousands of kids treating a 10-year-old test dummy like a real ghost, and right in the middle of it or just random scammers feeding off their absolute terror. The panic got so bad that the official corporate team actually had to step in, but the kids refused to let the ghost die. Even today, you can play popular horror games like Forsaken, where John Doe is written directly into the story as an actual corrupted killer. But while the creators can easily fix a broken friend request glitch, they can't always control what happens when they try to make a joke themselves. Think about the last time you made a sarcastic joke and somebody took it way too seriously. However, for Roblox, that joke accidentally spawned the most feared villain on the entire internet. Back on October 24th, 2007, one of the main guys running Roblox did exactly that. His name was Shedletsky, and he added a cool new book item to the store called the Necrobloxicon. He set the price at exactly 1,111 tickets. He wanted to give the item a fun little backstory, so he typed up a totally ridiculous description. He wrote that there was this evil monster from another dimension named 1 by 1 by 1 by 1. He said the monster absolutely hated 3D graphics and wanted to completely destroy the universe. The very next day, he even created an actual user profile with that exact username. It was just a harmless Easter egg, just a developer having some fun with the kids playing his game. But the kids on the platform were just kids. They did not read it as a joke. They read it as a warning. They looked at this creepy profile and believed it was a real legend. And that is when the actual hackers realized what was happening. Real exploiters saw this silly ghost story spreading around and decided to bring the nightmare to life. In December 2007, a famous moderator named Akis wrote some bad code and secretly injected it into popular games like Crossroads. You would just be running around playing normally, and out of nowhere, the sky would physically rip open. Severed heads started raining down across the whole map. The chat box would just spam messages screaming that 1 by 1 by 1 by 1 was coming for you. A year later, a group of 4 hackers took this to a completely different level. They used an outside program called Fiddler to literally break the game. Imagine, you were just sitting in your room playing with digital blocks. Suddenly, a scary countdown flashes right across your screen. It says security breach in seconds. When the timer hits 0, everything just breaks. The screen starts flashing all these crazy rapid colors. The audio loudly loops the song Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley, and then every single piece of the map just flies into the center of your screen until everything dissolves into a blank white space. To make this awful virus spread everywhere, these guys made a fake account named the Spammers. They uploaded 15 free models into the public toolbox. These models looked totally safe, but they secretly held the bad code. Innocent kids just put these models into their own games, and the virus copied itself automatically. Over 7,500 games were completely infected. The entire platform was bleeding. Little kids actually believed a demon was tearing the website apart piece by piece. The paranoia only got worse over time. In May 2010, a hacker group attacked the original 1 by 1 by 1 by 1 account. They broke it and changed the username to a bunch of random numbers, which forced the website moderators to permanently delete it. But then players found a totally different bug in the website. This bug let them force offline accounts to accept friend requests without anyone clicking yes. Suddenly, the friends list for 1 by 1 by 1 by 1 was totally packed with the most famous hackers on the platform. It literally looked like they were building a supervillain team right out in the open. You have thousands of players panicking on the message boards about a god-tier hacker, and the developers are just sitting there watching their own silly inside joke burn their servers to the ground. The panic got so bad that in 2011, a former admin had to write a huge post on the forums. He literally begged people to believe the truth. He explained that 1 by 1 by 1 by 1 was just a fake story Shedletsky made up. He just wanted the rumors to stop. But the community was not going to let a good ghost story rot in the patch notes. They even started redesigning what he looked like. Fans started designing their own version of what he looked like. They settled on a green domino crown, a hat that did not even exist in the official catalog. They built a wardrobe for a fictional hacker out of pure imagination. And here's the part where the executives completely lost the plot in the best possible way. The executives realized that a good ghost story actually prints money. Instead of fighting the rumors anymore, Roblox leaned all the way in. In 2017, they teamed up with a toy company to release a real, physical action figure of 1x1x1x1. They literally printed thousands of plastic toys of the most feared hacker in their own history. And whoever designed the plastic mold just went ahead and copied Musitive's fan model perfectly, cementing that fake green crown into actual canon forever. They didn't even stop there. During a big 2024 event called The Classic, 1x1x1x1 suddenly dropped out of the sky into the actual games. He wasn't just a funny background reference anymore. He showed up as a real bad guy. You actually had to fight him as a literal boss in huge titles like Blade Ball and Toilet Tower Defense. Even Blox Fruits leaned into it, which is the greatest game on Roblox. They took the blind terror of an entire generation of little kids and turned it into official company history. But while turning a fake hacker into an official boss fight is a fun little trick, sometimes the ghosts on this platform are completely real. Back in the early days of this game, making an account was not actually required. If you just wanted to look around, you could drop into a server as a guest. But being a guest was basically the worst experience you could possibly have. You were at the absolute bottom of the food chain. You could not customize your character, use admin commands, or even type in the chat. You were just a blank, featureless target for every kid who bothered to make an account. But then a super creepy rumor started floating around the forum boards. Kids were talking about logging into random servers and seeing a very specific guest walking around. They claimed this player had pitch black skin and glowing red eyes, and if you hovered your mouse over him, the little text box did not say a friendly guest like it usually did. It literally read, an evil guest. People were saying he could magically use admin commands to completely destroy maps. They said he was bypassing the safety filters and actually talking in the chat. The fear spread so incredibly fast that little kids were actually terrified to even click the play button. The actual truth about who was doing this is honestly hilarious. This was not some dead developer haunting the code. It wasn't a computer virus. It was just a bunch of middle schoolers with a free browser extension and too much free time. See, some players figured out they could download a free browser tool called Edit This Cookie. It just let you manually change the random ID number the website assigned to your guest character before you hit play. So they just typed in the number 666, hit save, and loaded into the game. The trick did not actually give them any special hacking powers or let them use the chat box, but because the mathematical chances of the website naturally giving someone that specific 3-digit number were basically zero, anyone who saw it just immediately panicked. So you had this entire generation of children convinced they were staring at a literal demon. Meanwhile, the actual person sitting behind the keyboard was just a 12-year-old kid, trying to bake digital pizzas or survive a natural disaster. The crazy part is how much money people made off this panic. YouTubers realized the ghost story was an absolute goldmine. In 2017, an animator named Oblivious HD turned the whole thing into a cinematic short film series. He gave the character a backstory, a name, a reason for existing. He made up this whole backstory about a bullied kid named Six, who mutated into a dark monster. That one series pulled in over 25 million views and basically cemented that black and red outfit as the official canon look for the character. Right when the hype was hitting its absolute peak, the developers just pulled the plug. In late 2017, Roblox officially deleted the entire guest feature from the website. They wiped the accounts and destroyed the ID numbers. It became physically impossible to ever play as a guest again. But you really cannot kill an internet ghost permanently. Fast forward to 2025, and a super popular horror game called Forsaken actually brought him back to life. They took this old, silly playground rumor and baked it straight into their official story. They made him a playable killer that costs exactly $1,666 in-game dollars. The designers committed completely to the horror. They made him this huge, feral predator with a flaming red mane and actual fire burning on his feet. They wrote him as a tortured soldier who escaped Area 51 and lost his mind reading the Necrobloxicon, the same cursed book Shedletsky invented as a joke back in 2007. They took a cheap browser trick and evolved it into a breathing nightmare that roars and drops the whole map into a red light when he hunts you. It just proves that if you leave a blank space in a game for long enough, players will absolutely fill it with a monster. But while a fake guest could only terrify the kids standing right in front of him, other players were busy building entire underground facilities designed to trap people in the dark on purpose. Usually when you fall out of bounds in a video game, you just drop into an empty gray sky until your character resets. It is annoying, but it is totally safe. Now imagine falling through the floor of a block game and landing squarely inside a highly classified underground surveillance facility. On November 15th, 2016, a player on the old Roblox Talk message boards claimed they did exactly that. They were just messing around with a broken teleporter script in their own private map, but instead of falling into an empty sky, they dropped into a completely undocumented server. They described this pitch-black concrete maze where anonymous users were actively monitoring player profiles across the entire website. They called the place Vault 8166. A few hours after they posted the story, the entire thread just vanished. The person who wrote it was never even identified, and the official moderators refused to say a single word about it. People immediately noticed the name of the place. The numbers 8166 are the exact first 4 digits of the user ID for 1 by 1 by 1 by 1. Yeah, the legendary fake hacker we talked about earlier. So this instantly stopped being a playground rumor and became a full-blown conspiracy theory. Players became totally convinced that the vault was a secret server that even the corporate administrators could not track or shut down. The rumor was that the people hiding inside were injecting viruses into free items and permanently deleting accounts from the inside out. It was basically a digital black site hiding right under everyone's feet. Then the lore expanded and it started actively hunting people. Players discovered a connected, even more dangerous sub-vault called Vault Red. And suddenly, people started reporting this terrifying thing they called the bot problem. You would be hanging out in a totally normal game and a random player would just walk up to you, except they bumped around with terrible pathfinding and spoke with perfect, robotic grammar. They would politely ask you to follow them, and if you made the mistake of doing so, they would force teleport your character straight into Red Vault. You never came back from that. It was basically digital kidnapping. The panic over this got so bad that it actually sparked a huge TikTok trend almost a decade later in 2025. Whoever took over the myth to build Vault Red went incredibly hard on the environmental horror. The new map was a huge labyrinth broken down into color-coded sectors. Sector A was a toxic waste incinerator. Sector B held a hostile artificial intelligence called the Circuit Breaker robot. Sector C was this tiny, cramped room holding a creepy entity that looked exactly like John Doe and just blasted heavy static audio. But the craziest detail was the smoke detectors. They placed these highly specific, USI electric brand smoke detectors right on the ceilings. If you walked too close to them, a tiny LED light would turn red. They would play this awful paranormal noise, and then they would crash your actual Roblox client. They took the paranoia of being watched and turned it into a piece of code that ended your session. And the actual answer to who was running this place is almost hilarious. For years, the community thought a notorious user named Boomblocks555 was the mastermind running the whole operation. But it wasn't a syndicate of rogue hackers or an untraceable server. It was just a single teenager named Pranath_Ver. He built the entire thing back in December 2016. He just took his love for those old Survive Area 51 games, mixed it up with some government conspiracy stuff, and built a creepy map in his free time. But the internet reaction got so totally out of hand that he panicked. Kids were making up their own extended lore and pretending they got kidnapped by bots. Pranath was convinced the moderation team would read the community response, assume he was running a real hacker operation, and permanently terminate his account. So he uploaded his original footage to a burner YouTube channel, completely abandoned the whole project, and just disappeared. He didn't even come back to officially claim his creation until 2020. You have to respect the self-awareness of just walking away. You accidentally build the most complex, terrifying digital prison on the internet. You convince millions of kids they are being monitored by a shadowy cabal, and then you just drop the whole thing because you don't want to lose your account. But while the vault relied on players falling into the wrong place at the wrong time, the next era of horror engineered highly sophisticated ways to come directly to you. Horror in video games is usually pretty cheap. A zombie jumps out of a closet, you scream, the game reloads, and you move on with your day. The fear is temporary because the monster is just lines of code. But back in the summer of 2017, someone figured out a way to break that rule entirely. He realized that the only way to actually terrify a person through a screen is to make them feel like another living human is sitting in the dark watching them. On July 28, 2017, a totally obscure account popped up on the platform going by the name Rust_010. The avatar design was highly specific and unsettling. A rusty shirt, a pinkish torso, and this frozen, wide-eyed smile that never changed. At this point in the platform's history, developers were focused on building giant haunted mansions, trying to scare thousands of random kids at once. This guy took the exact opposite approach. He spent all his time engineering a psychological stalking campaign targeted at exactly one person. He wanted to get inside the head of Flamingo, who happened to be the biggest Roblox YouTuber on the entire internet. Flamingo had millions of fans, so he was totally used to people recognizing him and following him around the servers. What he wasn't used to was the game itself hunting him. Rust drops his very first project, simply titled RUST. Flamingo hears about the creepy map and decides to check it out. He drops into the server and walks up to an automated computer terminal. The screen boots up, runs a fake scan of his avatar, and then outputs exactly 6 words. You have been identified as Flamingo. Right after that text appears, the world goes dark. You pick up a phone and hear a man whispering his secrets to you before it cuts out. Then you turn around. A dead, lifeless copy of your own avatar is standing right there. Same outfit, same everything, staring at nothing. Flamingo posted a video about the encounter, which kicked off a paranoid series of videos where he slowly lost his mind trying to solve the mystery. Rust responded by dropping even more complex maps. He built a game called Smile, where a tall white entity hunts you through a pitch-black forest. To escape, players had to push fake bots into a glowing red shrine. Doing that triggered a cutscene where you sit in a chair next to a bleeding, green version of Rust, while a cheerful 60s pop song called Make Your Own Kind of Music blasts over the sound of distant screams. But the scariest detail isn't the environment, it's how the developer was actually operating. While Flamingo was frantically running through these woods, he tried to stick close to other random players to feel safe. He specifically bonded with a guy named Jimmy Biscuit 74. They explored together, and Jimmy felt like a comforting anchor in a hostile world. The truth was deeply sinister. Jimmy Biscuit 74 was just Rust, playing on an alternate spy account. He stood right next to his target, silently watching him panic from inside the same server. He would drop cryptic chat messages asking, "Are you still there?" And players later realized the first letters of these words spelled his own name. He hid his calling card right in the chat box. The tension reached an absolute boiling point when Rust released a sequel with the painfully innocent title Happy. The game dumped Flamingo into a dark, oppressive forest, alongside other players with super generic names, like Cute Bunny 9 Million. By this point, Flamingo was deeply paranoid and refused to trust anyone. And he was right to be paranoid. Rust went in and banned everyone else from the server. He cleared the room so he could fill it with his own spy accounts and leave Flamingo with nobody to trust. While exploring the forest, Flamingo stumbled upon a secret, dark cave hidden right near some rocks. Deep inside that cave, he found a hidden computer terminal. He clicked the screen, and it handed him a 5-digit code, 45682. Later, it handed another player the code 17368. The entire myth-hunting community practically exploded over those numbers. Kids turned YouTube comment sections into frantic war rooms trying to decode the cipher. Flamingo ran a related program and found the phrase loneliness and isolation attached to the numbers. People convinced themselves the digits were player IDs or secret coordinates. Everyone believed that cracking the terminal code would unlock the secrets of the universe. After years of the community tearing these games apart, Rust officially retired the project in May 2020 after some assets leaked. Everyone assumed he was this brilliant, untouchable mastermind. Then a video popped up on his YouTube channel titled Explaining My Rust_010 Roblox Games. The original creator just looked directly at the camera and completely destroyed the illusion. He confessed there was absolutely no master plan. He was just a teenager who liked building horror games modeled after real abandoned locations, places like Camp Hero in New York. The whole psychological stalker persona just kind of evolved by accident. Then he opened the raw code for that legendary computer terminal. The numbers meant absolutely nothing. He just wrote a tiny basic script that spat out randomized digits every single time someone touched the screen. There was no grand cipher. He built the interface to look like it meant something because he liked how it looked. That was the whole plan. The scale of that manipulation is something I cannot get over. Hundreds of thousands of teenagers spent years ripping their hair out over a basic random number generator. He built a trap that ran entirely on the human need to find meaning where none exists. He weaponized parasocial stalking, terrified millions of people, and then smoothly transitioned into a normal Roblox YouTuber under the exact same name. He built an entire legacy out of thin air just by making people feel like they were never alone in the woods. But the next era of internet horror figured out that sometimes the scariest thing isn't being watched. It's the sudden, creeping realization that you are completely, utterly alone. You log onto your computer, pick out a themed outfit in 5 minutes, and walk it down a glowing runway while a room full of strangers judges your color palette. It is completely harmless. But if you ignore the runway, walk into the cosmetic salon, and clip through a totally normal-looking clothing rack, you drop straight into a dark, cobweb-filled. Before game creators push a big update to everyone, they test it on a fake, safe version of the game. Back then, they used a testing zone called Site Test 3. In plain sight, at its peak, the game was pulling over 2 billion visits. To put that in context, that is more people than live in all of North and South America combined. And right in the middle of that neon lobby sits a nail salon run by a single NPC named Lana. For months, she just sat there doing absolutely nothing but changing your nail color. But then players found a diary sitting on her shelf. Lana got diagnosed with a severe illness and had to pay for all these expensive medical treatments. She survived, but she was totally drowning in debt. That's when the owner of the game, a creator named Gigi, offered her a terrible deal. She gave Lana a job she couldn't refuse to help pay off the crushing debt, but it meant working the salon desk 24 hours a day without a single break. Absolute digital slavery. Lana was obviously furious about this. She started writing diary entries about wanting to burn the whole salon down. She eventually found out that the developer was secretly running an evil cult called the Awakening. They were planning to use the players for some twisted biological experiments. So Lana decided to fight back. She built an underground resistance group called Cidade, which is a Portuguese word for a deep, melancholic longing, and formed an elite inner circle of loyal supporters called the Coterie. You think you're just playing a fun little rebel story about a nail tech fighting a bad developer, but players digging through the side games eventually realized the rebellion was falling apart. 4 of Lana's closest supporters were brutally murdered. Their eyes were violently ripped out. The whole rebellion was just a massive trick to gather sacrifices. And the monster wearing Lana's face was actually harvesting her own friends for body parts. And she didn't even try to hide the violence. There was a secret side game called Questionnaire, where players could walk right up to Lana and ask her questions in real time. She used it to taunt the players right to their faces while actively holding her remaining followers hostage. The absolute best part of this whole mystery is the twist that came right after that. The Lana who committed those murders was an imposter. The original girl was kidnapped by the developers, dragged down into that creepy basement we talked about earlier, and replaced with a fake copy wearing pants instead of a skirt. You can literally walk up to her cage right now. You can read the frantic messages she's scratched on the wall, begging people to believe she's the real one. This is where the whole thing falls apart. The developers were only pawns in the story. The true mastermind is an ancient entity named Agamemnon. Yes, the literal king from Greek mythology who sacrificed his own daughter just to get good wind for his ships in the Trojan War. Agamemnon is an ancient evil trapped inside a prison in a completely different dimension. He desperately needs a physical body so he can escape into the real world. So he targeted Lana. Agamemnon calls Lana his apple. That is not a coincidence. The apple of discord was the original spark of the entire Trojan War, and he used Lana the exact same way. And just like the ancient myth, Agamemnon used Lana to start a digital war. He needed a perfect, soulless vessel to escape his prison, so he kidnapped the real Lana and used her doppelganger to slaughter her friends. Why? Because he needed those harvested body parts to build a physical monster out of raw meat. Players actually found a secret, pulsating room made entirely of raw meat, hidden just outside the main fashion house. He was stitching together a completely deformed creature using the harvested organs of his own dead followers, their eyes, their hearts, and their bodies. My brain honestly can't wrap around the scale of this whole trick. You have millions of kids just sitting there trying to build a cute summer outfit. They're completely oblivious to the fact that an ancient Greek king is running a horrific meat cult right under their virtual feet. Recently, the developers completely removed Lana from the desk. They left behind empty moving boxes and a hiring sign, replacing her with a rival nail tech who gladly took the job. Agamemnon wants to open a portal and take over the servers completely. The entire fashion world is just standing there putting on lip gloss, waiting for the end. Have you ever stayed way too late at your school, or walked through an empty mall right before it closes? There is this deeply uncomfortable feeling you get in those places. A building that is normally packed with loud people just feels completely wrong when it goes totally silent. It feels like you are trespassing on reality itself. Back on May 12, 2019, somebody on an internet paranormal board posted a single picture that captured that exact feeling perfectly. It was just a photo of an ugly yellow office room. It had these harsh fluorescent lights on the ceiling and this gross damp-looking carpet. There was no context at all. But then another random person replied to that picture with a short story, and they accidentally created a huge internet obsession. They brought up this old video game cheat called no-clipping. In older games, no-clipping lets your character walk right through solid walls to explore the map. But this story asked a terrifying question. What happens if you accidentally no-clip through a wall in real life? The story claimed you'd drop completely out of our physical world and land straight in the back rooms. The post described the place as 600 million square miles of absolutely nothing. Just random, empty rooms with peeling, yellow wallpaper. The only sound is the loud hum of those dying lights overhead. And the scariest detail was a single warning. If you hear something wandering around in the distance, it has absolutely already heard you. The internet took that one little paragraph and went completely unhinged. People started treating it like a giant collaborative writing project. They invented different floors. They made level 1 a dark parking garage, and level 2 a claustrophobic maintenance tunnel. They even added monsters called facelings and smilers, but the actual fear never came from those monsters. It came from a psychological trick called kinopsia. That's just a fancy word for the heavy, creepy atmosphere of an abandoned place. The Backrooms takes that deeply human discomfort and stretches it across an infinite maze. The myth had already spread to every corner of the internet, but in January of 2022, a 16-year-old kid named Kane Parsons pushed it straight into the mainstream. He uploaded a short video called The Backrooms Found Footage to YouTube. He used 3D animation software to make it look exactly like a damaged VHS tape from the 1990s. It showed a guy holding a camera accidentally falling right into the yellow walls. He even introduced the secret government research group called the Async Foundation that intentionally opened the portal. The video was so visually perfect that it pulled in over 78 million views. The major Hollywood studio named A24 actually stepped in and produced a full movie adaptation that he directed, which just hit theaters in May of 2026. The real origin of that photograph, though, is the part that breaks the whole thing. For years, people scoured the internet trying to figure out where what room was. They checked old satellite maps and dug through deep web archives. Finally, in May 2024, some internet detectives figured it out. The most famous horror image of the entire decade was taken way back on June 12, 2002. It was a photograph of a Hobbytown, USA store in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, taken while the owners were getting some water damage repaired. Naturally, this kind of atmospheric dread bled straight into Roblox. The website was completely flooded with cheap, boring clones. But the game called Apeirophobia got it right. The developers didn't just build a lazy walking simulator. They built over 15 different levels using super high quality textures. The yellow wallpaper actually looked wet and gross to look at. They also added a strict stamina bar. You can't just sprint away from danger forever. You have to carefully manage your breath while trying to escape these chaotic mazes where the hallways literally don't make mathematical sense. The Backrooms proved you don't need jump scares or blood to terrify millions of players. You just need to trap them in a boring, familiar room they can never leave. But while that yellow maze trapped players in empty offices, another myth turned an innocent website glitch into an actual digital religion. Error pages on the internet are normally super boring. You click a bad link, the screen goes white, and you just hit the back button to move on with your day. But a decade ago, a bunch of kids stumbled onto a broken profile page and absolutely refused to let it go. Instead of reporting the bug to the developers, they took that empty space and built a functioning digital religion out of it. It all started in February 2010. The internet was a lot smaller back then, and game forums felt like tiny, quiet neighborhoods. A player went onto the message boards and asked a simple question about an account named Noli. The profile was completely broken. It had no avatar, and the last seen date was just a bunch of creepy question marks. The system was so confused by the missing data that searching for his name actually caused a bug. You couldn't pull up his proper account no matter how hard you tried. Years later, an old administrator finally admitted what was actually happening. It was just a clerical error. The database had simply lost the user's file, so the website code completely broke whenever anyone tried to look them up. But the kids playing the game did not want a boring technical excuse. They wanted a legend, so they just invented one out of thin air. They decided Noli was a real player from the very early days of the platform. They made up this story where he was the first guy to ever get a rare hat called the Void Star, but the hat was cursed. It infected his digital brain and mutated him into an all-powerful virus that could shut down servers and delete other accounts. The myth claimed a brave moderator had to step in and wipe him from the mainframe just to save the website. You would think the story ends there, but you don't just delete a god and expect people to forget about it. By 2018, that old forum rumor exploded into a huge alternate reality game. A group formed calling themselves the Void Cult. They stopped telling simple spooky stories around digital campfires. They treated Noli like an actual ascended demigod who watched over the blocky world from a higher dimension. They even wrote a long, complicated Bible. This holy book claimed that a disaster trapped millions of innocent players inside an inescapable, older version of the game. These trapped kids were infected with a sickness called the Plague. The sickness added brutal rules to a children's game. It made characters feel hunger, thirst, and real physical pain. If your avatar died from the sickness, you turned into a feral zombie. The horrific catch was that your mind stayed totally awake inside the rotting body. You had to sit there and watch yourself attack other people without being able to stop. The cult didn't just stop at giving characters human needs. They built an entire dark, sadistic society around it. They worshipped Noli as a literal god of destruction. They believed he demanded blood, so the cultist would run wild, performing ritual sacrifices, hosting brutal death tournaments, and doing horrific experiments on other players just to satisfy him. They took this roleplay incredibly seriously. They built a science division called Null Labs to run experiments on the game code. They created an armed military branch called the Royal Guard to defend the borders. They needed an army because they were fighting a brutal holy war against a rival faction called the Scarlet Order. That group hated witchcraft and celebrated Christmas. Just pause and picture that. You have thousands of teenagers logging onto a block-building simulator, and they are fighting an organized religious war over a broken URL. The dedication went so deep, they coded an entire afterlife. If you died bravely for the cult, your soul went to reverse ASPX. It was a beautiful, floating silver castle surrounded by cherry blossoms. But if you didn't die in battle and instead succumbed to the sickness, you got dragged down to Syrric. That was a dark, dead forest guarded by a giant deity named Bortlel. He waited at an altar of statues to judge your infected soul and decide if you were finally worthy to ascend. They even built a physical holy site. It was a dark, stormy game called The Tempest. You spawn inside a cold stone temple with thunder cracking outside. But the map is a total trap. If you stand inside for too long, a message pops up on your screen saying that you have angered Noli. The second you read it, the sky goes pitch black and the entire stone ceiling violently crushes your character. The developers making games today still use Noli. He shows up as an official monster in modern horror games like Pressure and Forsaken, but bringing him back caused a real-world problem. The tragedy mask that everyone associated with Noli had to be completely redesigned after the person who created it was exposed as a real-world predator. That story gets darker the further you pull at it, but we will get there. The developers wanted to keep the ghost story alive, but they absolutely could not use anything attached to a real-life criminal, so they completely redesigned the monster from scratch. They washed the real-world darkness off the character, just so the fictional nightmare could survive. Solving a digital murder mystery sounds like a fun weekend project. You grab some friends to code a few clues and crack the case. But for 3 solid years, an entire army of teenagers was completely trapped inside a psychological maze called the Shadelight Investigation, and the guy who built the maze was actively playing them like cheap plastic toys. The The entire obsession revolved around a mysterious portal to a totally different dimension called Shadelight. This portal was buried deep beneath the virtual house of a traumatized World War II veteran named Chuck Lloyd. You couldn't just pick a lock or glitch your way inside. The path was blocked by a series of heavy doors that demanded exactly 5 distinct code phrases to open, and the game forced you to rip those 5 keys away from some of the most dangerous characters scattered across the whole platform. This wasn't a basic scavenger hunt, where you just click a glowing button and win a badge. Players were walking into actual digital war zones. You had to sit down and interrogate a guy named Father Grimm. He played the role of an abusive caretaker who kidnapped kids and physically twisted them into living nursery rhymes. Then you had to survive Ulifer, a highly aggressive asylum escapee who preyed on the other characters. Meanwhile, a villain named Goldady sat in the background wearing a golden mask, actively manipulating all these monsters with lies so he could eventually slaughter them and claim the dimension for himself. When Flamingo started uploading videos about the investigation, millions of eyes followed him in. Kids built huge task forces and spent hours cracking complex ciphers just trying to beat Goldady to the prize. The lore they built was incredibly detailed, but the actual reality of who was writing the lore is the part that makes my stomach turn. These players fully believed they were fighting against a massive network of rogue game developers. They thought all these monsters were run by totally different people. That was a complete lie. Almost every single major character in the entire Shadelight universe was secretly controlled by just one guy, a user named Kazdom. And Kazdom wasn't just some random player. He was the literal chairman of the RM Foundation, that was the absolute largest myth-hunting group on the entire website. He was running the detective agency and secretly programming the serial killers at the exact same time. He was just sitting at his keyboard playing chess against himself, farming hundreds of thousands of little kids for views and attention. He practically had the entire internet eating out of his hand. They even dropped a public countdown timer building toward a grand finale scheduled for October 2021. But right in the middle of the hype, the entire investigation completely crashed. Not because of a coding error, because Kazdom's real life finally caught up to him. Leaked documents suddenly hit the internet and proved he was a real-world predator. He was using his position over the fan base to groom underage girls. The darkness he was writing into his video games was absolutely nothing compared to the monster he actually was behind the screen. The whiplash of that moment is completely sickening. You have an army of teenagers who spent years of their lives totally invested in saving fictional children from digital villains. They had absolutely zero clue the person telling them the story was abusing real people. The community response was immediate and ruthless. They went completely scorched earth. The exposure tore the entire myth-hunting world apart. Characters retired, groups collapsed. Years of built lore just evaporated. Kazdom desperately tried to cling on to his power, but his reputation was totally destroyed, and the RM Foundation completely collapsed. Those heavy doors under the house never opened. The remaining keys were lost. The biggest mystery in the history of the game just died on an unresolved cliffhanger. But while Shadelight ended in a complete collapse, other developers were building experiences that did not need a myth group or a long con to terrify you. If you download a game on your phone right now, it's probably passed through dozens of corporate safety filters. Companies spend millions of dollars making absolutely sure nothing traumatizing slips past the sensors before a kid can touch it. But over a decade ago, nobody was checking the doors. Developers were just leaving psychological landmines lying around in the dark for you to step on. You click on a map with a totally innocent thumbnail. The game is called Never Look Again. You spawn into this foggy, quiet little garden filled with scarecrows. It feels completely safe. But then you wander into a shack, and the game physically will not let you leave. The fog gets so thick that you can barely see, and suddenly, there are chanting people circling a pole outside, and the scarecrows are actively moving. The rumor is that the creator built this map specifically to lure people in and trap them. Every time he catches someone, A brand new scarecrow magically appears in the garden. These early creators weren't trying to build profitable franchises. They just wanted to mess with your head. Take a map called Davendrag. A developer named Juke built this totally dead black and white town. The long-standing rumor is that he recreated his actual real-life hometown strictly from memory right after it burned to the ground. You walk up to the little blocky citizens expecting to see normal plastic smiley faces, but instead, you just find these bizarre NPCs with human x-rays and medical ultrasounds of real babies mapped onto avatar heads, wandering around a completely desolate wasteland. The visual contrast is just so incredibly bleak. It makes your stomach drop the second you realize what you're actually walking through. Then you wander into My Dollhouse. You walk inside this giant toy house, and there are these strangely tall, frozen dolls everywhere. But every time you walk into a different room, the dolls physically change positions. The entire house slowly morphs and changes around you until you are standing in pure, suffocating darkness, lit only by the fuzzy static of a broken television. Some games don't even try to hide the violence. A map called The Truth to Lesis just dropped your character onto a tiny map where you literally cannot move. There is a ticking clock, and when it stops, the screen says tick-tock, tick-tock. Looks like you're next. But the dread didn't just stay in obscure story games. Players started finding hidden exploit facilities. One infamous place was the Cool Kid facility. You would spawn into this totally blank hallway, but if you walked down it, you would find this bizarre room drenched in red with a decal splattered all over the walls demanding you join Team Cool Kid. And right before you could process what was happening, a weird, hostile entity would literally run straight at you, forcing players to just instantly shut down their games in pure panic. But the darkest chapter of this whole era is what exploiters did when they figured out that the youngest players were the most vulnerable. Exploiters, like the Tubers93 group, specifically targeted games meant for literal toddlers. They broke into Little Angels Daycare and forcefully changed the name to Little Devils Daycare. They flooded the game with disturbing imagery and renamed it Little Devils Daycare. Picture being 5 years old, just trying to play house with your friends, and your bright daycare suddenly fills with Illuminati symbols and demonic books buried under the floorboards. Kids were closing their games, crying, and telling their parents. Eventually, the people running the website got smarter and patched the holes. The era of cheap jump scares and stolen X-ray images faded out, because modern developers realized they could do something way more effective. They could weaponize actual storytelling. Look at Piggy. On the surface, it looks like a cheap, blocky Peppa Pig ripoff, but the actual story is a sprawling tragedy. A billionaire named Mr. P had a terminally ill wife. He desperately tried to engineer a medical cure to save her life, but he made a terrible mistake. His cure didn't work. Instead, he accidentally unleashed a rogue infection that hijacked innocent minds and turned the entire world into something he never intended. Every single monster chasing you is just the direct fallout of a husband who accidentally destroyed the whole planet trying to save the woman he loved. And the peak of this modern dread is doors. You load in, thinking you just need to survive 100 haunted hotel rooms. You're completely wrong. The hotel is an interdimensional prison. The monsters hunting you down the hallways are the actual inmates, and the lore runs so much deeper than just escaping. Fans have spent years tearing apart the evidence, realizing the hotel isn't just a haunted house. It is a demented form of hell on Earth. You were trapped in an environment overrun by a chaotic infection, led by an apex predator known as Seek, who corrupts everything he touches. And those helpful colored lights that flickered to guide you, they're actual gods, competing deities, playing out an endless argument using the players as their pieces. You aren't just playing a simple survival game, you are fighting through a digital purgatory. The monsters on this platform evolved from broken pixels into actual deities, and that kind of heavy lore makes you wonder just how deep the roots of this entire universe really go. If you look up how this platform actually started, You get a very clean, totally boring Silicon Valley success story. Two guys named David Baszucki and Eric Castle rent a small office in Menlo Park back in 2003. They build a physics engine, launch a game, and eventually become billionaires. That is the official timeline. But an entire corner of the internet completely rejects that story. They are convinced this game didn't start in a sunny office. They believe it began as a classified psychological hazard built all the way back in 1998. We have to talk about the Active Entertainment prototype. The legend comes from a supposedly leaked autobiography. It was written by an anonymous former employee who was so paranoid about his identity getting out that he threatened to sue anyone who ever published his journal. But the transcript hit the internet anyway. It paints a picture of a studio that was an absolute train wreck. They were running under a terrible CEO named Oliver Rad. Their lead developer was a guy named Alexander who worked constantly and lied to everyone. He even claimed he invented a new technology called a hypertext executable. He eventually teamed up with an artist named Yave to build a secret prototype. And this was not some cute block building simulator for kids. The legend claims the prototype was physically dangerous to run. The leaked journal describes watching it destroy Alexander completely. Not a dramatic explosion, something quieter and worse. He started weeping uncontrollably at his desk, growing physically weaker, until they found him completely blank, staring at nothing, his mind just gone. The prototype had essentially lobotomized its own creator through the screen. You spend an entire year engineering a fake history about a studio that destroyed itself from the inside out. Seeing that happen made the rest of the staff completely snap. In a state of pure panic, the remaining employees grabbed actual hammers and went to town on the entire headquarters. They smashed every single computer and hard drive to absolute dust. They wanted to make certain nobody could ever boot that prototype up again. The artist quit on the spot, and the entire company just vanished into thin air. You can totally see why kids love this specific kind of horror. They are obsessed with lost media. They desperately want to believe that underneath their bright, happy dress-up games is a cursed file that lobotomized its own creator. But the absolute best part of this terrifying conspiracy is looking at who actually wrote it. Because the 1998 prototype isn't a recovered document. It is just a creepypasta written by a single wiki user named Johnny2339. He spent a whole year of his life writing this huge fake lore and a prequel. He was trying to craft the ultimate urban legend. He hyped it up on the message boards for months, telling everyone a masterpiece was dropping soon, and when he finally hit the publish button, nobody cared. So in February 2024, Johnny suffered a total public meltdown right there on the forums. He posted a thread screaming in all caps. He demanded to know why everyone was ignoring him. He started questioning if his grammar was bad or if the community was just full of haters. He actually asked if his entire dream of becoming a writer was totally worthless. He had even complained a few months earlier that a dumb story he wrote years ago while allegedly smoking weed got way more attention than the serious horror masterpiece he spent a year building. It's the ultimate irony. You try to create the scariest myth on the platform, and you just end up screaming into an empty forum. If you are still up and want to watch more, please watch our video on Minecraft Facts.